Introduction to neural networks. Neural networks are networks of neurons, for example, as found in real, that is biological brains. So neurons exist in biological brains that helps an entity to perform a specific task or achieve knowledge. So artificial neurons are approximation of the neurons found in real brains. They may be physical devices or purely mathematical constructs. So the artificial neurons are replica of real neurons. Artificial neural networks are networks of artificial neurons and constitute crude approximations in parts of real brains. They may be physical devices or simulated on conventionally. In computers' point of view, an artificial neural network or ANN is just a parallel computational system consisting of many simple processing elements connected together in a specific way in order to perform a particular task. So artificial neural networks consist in multiple neurons, artificial neurons I mean, and in a parallel computational system, and they exist to achieve a particular task. So in this slide we can see a biological neuron. So a biological neuron consists of cell body, dendrites, axons, and a myelinated axon connector, which is this one. So basically, neuron accepts inputs from x1 to xn and inputs, and via its the inputs are passed from the dendrites. Dendrites are receiving terminals, and it passes the information to the cell body where the information is processed, and specific output is passed from the cell body to output axon here. These are the axon terminals or endpoints. That is, every axon terminal will have a specific output y1 to ym. So these are passed to the information is passed from cell body to the axon via a myelin sheet, a myelinated axon. So the function of a neuron is to convert input into output, and based on some processing function. Characteristics of artificial neural network. No requirement of an explicit description of the problem. In an artificial neural network, we don't require the problem description to be fed into the computer, and no need for programmer to code the functionality. So artificial neural network learn by themselves whatever the problem is, and its solution also they output, and there is no need for a program to code the problem solution form or the functionality of the problem. So the neural computer adapts itself during a training period. During the training period, the neural network adapts itself to give the output in a specific form, and based on problematic examples given during training, neural computer solves the problems. After sufficient training, the neural computer is able to relate the problem data to solutions, inputs to outputs, and it is then able to offer a viable solution to a brand new problem. Hope this is clear. After the training period, the neural network adapts itself to give output to new data and maps inputs to outputs, and it is then able to offer a viable solution to a brand new problem. Finally, the last characteristic is able to generalize or to handle incomplete data. So whether we feed complete or incomplete data to the neural network, it is able to handle it. Information exchange between neurons. How is the information exchange between two neurons? So suppose this is the axon terminal that gives the output of a particular neuron, and here there is a synaptic gap, and there are neurotransmitters inside that allows the output from this axon to pass to dendrite or input of another cell. So hope this is clear. Output of one neuron is transmitted to input of another neuron. So in the biological lingo, we call the wires that provide the input to the neurons dendrites. Sometimes, depending on the incoming signal, the neuron may fire and send a signal out for the other neurons to receive. So based on the incoming signal, some outputs are fired based on some condition by that input taking neuron and pass to the next neuron. The wire that transmits the outgoing signal is called an axon, as I told you, and each axon may be connected to one or more dendrites at intersections that are called synapses. So the intersection between two neurons are synapses. Isolated from its fellow neurons, a single neuron is quite unimpressive and capable of only a very restricted set of behaviors. When connected to each other, however, the system resulting from their concerted action can become extremely complex. So a single neuron's behavior is limited to a set of functionality, and when connected to each other, the neural networks, however, exhibit a broad set of functionality that is required for the problem statement. The behavior of the system is determined by the ways in which the neurons are wired together. So the resulting output is final result of how the neurons are wired together. Each neurons, each neuron, I mean, reacts to the incoming signals in a specific way that can also adapt over time. What it says is the behavior of the neuron changes with time and according to the incoming signal, and this adaptation is known to be the key to functions such as memory and learning. So uh, while learning, the neuron adapts itself to incoming signals and gives expected outputs. Neuron versus node. In this slide, we'll see differences between a biological neuron in brain and a neuron node in artificial neural network. Below you can see a biological neuron in brain that I have already discussed. It is the cell body in the middle and which takes the set of inputs from dendrites, various dendrites, and upon activation it passes the output to via axon to the final output axon, and via axon terminus it passes to other neurons or output cells. So similarly, in a neuron node in artificial neural network, a set of inputs are provided to a node that has some mathematical functionality attached to it, and it provides the output. So basically these are the types of mathematical features sometimes available with the node. Synapse versus weight. In biological neuron, when two neurons are connected to each other, there is a synaptic gap in between them, and the second neuron accepts input only when the first neuron has a certain set of inputs that cause an activation on that neuron, which causes it to fire output to the axon and pass it to the next neuron via synaptic gap neurotransmitters. But in case of ANN, we pass on the signal based on a synaptic weight. Weight is defined as a value that decides whether or not to fire the output from the input neuron to the second neuron. So the connection is controlled by the strength or amplitude of a connection between both nodes, also called the synaptic weight. Multiple synapses can connect the same neurons, with each synapse having a different level of influence trigger on whether that neuron is fired and activates the next neuron. So within these two, there can be multiple synapses, each having a different weight, and that will decide whether or not to fire specific output to the second neuron. Architecture of neural network. A typical neural network contains a large number of artificial neurons called units arranged in a series of layers. So these are layers of neurons. Each of them is a separate neuron. Artificial neural network or ANN contains one layer of input. This is the input layer. One or more hidden layers. These are the hidden layers, and one output layer. Elements of neural network. There is no computation or input layer neurons. That is the first step. And second step is two processes on every computational neuron. That is weighted sum and activation function. I'll discuss them in coming slides. But suppose these are the input layers. This is the input layer I mean. And these are the inputs being fed to the input layer x1, x2, x3. So these all will go to the computational neuron here directly, and there will be no computation on input layer neurons. After that, the computational neuron will do the weighted sum function and pass it to the sigmoid function in the same neuron, that is, and finally give the output y. A single neuron structure is shown in this slide. So what it is it contains a set of inputs, probably from x1 to xn, xm, and along with some weight from w1 to wm. It is passed to the computational neuron here, which does the summation and activation function on the input and provides the output y. I will discuss what are summation and activation functions and what is this bias here. Bias as an extra input is explained in this slide. Bias can be added along with input so that the neuron has a default activation input enabled even when it does not receive other inputs. It is generally set to +1. So in order for the neural network to go smoothly and every time even no input is provided, it should go on functioning. A bias is provided along with the inputs, that is always generally set to +1. So here is the bias as x naught, that is provided a weight along with a weight w naught to the input layer here, and along with all the other inputs it is passed on to the computational neuron that gives the output y. So bias is an external parameter of the neuron and can be modeled by adding an extra input, and this right here is the formula for the weight function. Local field v is equal to summation j is equal to 0 to m wi wj I mean xj, that is summation of weights into input, that is wj into xj, and from j is equal to 0 to j is equal to m. So it is the local field, and w naught is the bias that we can set. In this case w naught is equal to b. So how is the neural network implemented? We see a practical implementation of neural network now. find the x and y. So we need to get the inputs x and know the output that is required for the neural network to give in case of input x, that is y. So output y is desired from the neural network. Then we assign w and b, that is weights to all the inputs, and b the bias we assign. Then we do forward propagation that I will discuss in coming slides. And then we apply the logit function on the local field, that is the activation function is applied on the local field. Then find the error in the output, and then we do a back propagation and find the updated weights that optimize error. So after back propagation we make the system learn so that it can update the weights so that error is minimized and it gets the desired output. Then again we repeat the same process, that is forward propagation, and apply the logic function on the local field and find error in the output, and again back propagation until we get the final output to be y. In this slide we see a practical neural network, that is practical implementation of a neural network. So we can see that there is an input layer here that consists of input nodes I1 and I2. There is a hidden layer, H1 and H2 nodes are there in that, and there is an output layer, O1 and O2 are there in that layer. It also consists of bias B1 sent as bias 2, the computational neurons H1 and H2. In fact, all the computational neurons lie in the hidden layer. So H1 and H2 are also computational neurons. So this bias B2 is additionally provided to the output layers so that for the same reason as bias B1 is being provided, so that in case no input is provided by the input layer, the system should function smoothly. So we proceed with those steps I have mentioned before. We assign the inputs 0.05, 0.10. The required output is 0.01 for O1 and 0.99 for O2 output node. We provide all the weights W1, W2, W3, W4, W5, W6, W7, W8, and we provide the bias as 0.35 for B1 and 0.60 for B2. Let's see what the neural network currently predicts given the weight and biases in the shown figure and inputs of 0.05 and 0.10. To do this, feed those inputs forward through the network. So what will be the summation output for V is net H1, that is node H1 is hidden layer H1 node is gives the summation output as local field V is equal to W1 I1 into plus W2 I2 plus B1 into I. So I is mostly 1 here, but B1 is given to be 0.35. So total comes out to be 0.3775, and this local field V is supplied to the activation function here. That is the output from the hidden layer node H1. So basically, generally, we use the sigmoid activation function, and that is 1 by 1 plus e to the power minus x, where x is the local field from at that hidden layer neuron node. So in this case, the local field V is 0.3775. So we do 1 by 1 plus e to the power minus 0.3775. That comes out to be this value. Similarly, we find the output of S2 to be this value. Next, we find the net output at O1, output node O1. So that is equal to W5 into output of H1 plus W6 into output of H2 plus B2 into 1. So that comes out to be this. And after the applying the logit function, what is logit function? It is simply the activation function used. In this case, it is the sigmoid function, that is 1 by 1 plus e to the power minus x, where x is the local field. So output for the final output for node O1 is this, and final output for node O2 is this. Now moving forward, we calculate the error. Total error is the root mean square error for the neural network, that is summation half of target minus output whole square for each of the output nodes. So for error for O1 node it will be 0.01, where 0.1 was the required value, and 0.07 this is the obtained value in the previous, as in the previous slide. So this will be the total error at node O1. Similarly, total error at node O2 is this, and the total error thus can be substituted here, and final total E total will be this much. So as in the hidden layer computational neurons, the output layer sometimes can also be act as a computational neuron. So then it applies the logit function and sigmoid function as well on the coming input. Now we discuss backpropagation. The goal of backpropagation is to update each of the weights in the network so that they cause the actual output to be closer to the target output, thereby minimizing the error for each output in the neuron and the network. So with backpropagation, we can make the system learn by updating its weights so that the actual output is closer to the target output. So how much change in W5 affects the total error? That is the question. That is, given the node W5, how much change in that node, sorry, not node, it is the weight. So how much change in W5 will affect the total error is the question. So that can be answered by partial derivative of E total with respect to W5 is equal to del of E total by del of output O1. So it has split it into different parameters so that it can easily take the partial derivative with respect to W5. So as we know, we can get all these separately. So if these all cancel out, we will be left with this only. So this can be written in the form of this, and we'll see how we calculate this right hand side of the equation now. Now we'll see the derivatives involved and how they work out to be. If we remember the mathematical foundations class, the partial derivative of a function is with respect to a variable is equal to only when considering that variable alone. So not the other variables involved in the function, I mean. So when considering E total, which is equal to summation half of target minus output whole square, when we take partial derivative of E total with respect to output at O1 node, we can drop the O2 node function variable altogether from this summation and only take the derivative with respect to output O1, that is equal to minus target O1 minus output O1. Similarly for output O1, where output O1 is a sigmoid function based on the local field net O1, net at output node O1, that is, it will be coming out to be partial derivative of output O1 with respect to net O1 is equal to output O1 minus output O1 into 1 minus output O1. Similarly for net O1, which is a sigmoid function as shown here, if we take the partial derivative with respect to row 5, I mean with respect to W5, it will come out to be this, if you know the differentiation formulas correctly. Next we will substitute these values in the previous equation. So we come back to the back propagation steps. We calculate each of these values as discussed and substitute their values as calculated from other previous slides. And finally we substitute that in the main equation to get this value. So this is the change in E total with respect to W5 weight alone. Similarly, we calculate for other weights. What is the change in E total with respect to all other weights? And to decrease the error, subtract the value from current weight after multiplying with the error rate. That is taking to be 0.5 in this case. So what is error rate? It is the value that is multiplied by the total error for a particular weight, and it is subtracted from the original weight to give a new weight value to that node. So the W5 originally was 0.4 and eta or the error rate is taken to be 0.5, and this is multiplied with the error calculated before for this weight, and its final value is this. So this is how weights are updated when neural network functions. Similarly, we calculate the updated weights for with respect to other weights. So basically, we calculate the updated weights and then use them in our network, and till the error final error E total reduces to a acceptable value, or we get the final output as equal to Y. So this is the functioning of a neural network. Hope this is all clear. The forward propagation and the back propagation steps are the most important. Next, we define activation functions, or the functions that are used after the sigmoid function is applied on the computational neuron. Activation function can be of two types: linear activation functions and non-linear activation functions. And activation functions introduce non-linear properties to a neural network. That is useful when giving a complex scenario. The neural network should learn that scenario efficiently. Now we discuss the sigmoid function. So the function is differentiable, that is, we can find the slope of the sigmoid curve at any 2 points. So after the summation, we get the local field as z, and we apply the sigmoid function here. That gives us 1 by 1 plus e to the power minus z, and that is this curve here. And it is differentiable at any 2 points, fully differentiable. The function is monotonic, but the function's derivative is not. The logistic sigmoid function can cause a neural network to get stuck during the training time. So this is a drawback when using sigmoid function for activation function. The neural network can get stuck during training time. The soft, because its differentiation is not monotonic. I mean the derivative is not monotonic. Thus it can get stuck. The softmax function is more generalized activation function index, which is used for multi-class classification. Next we see the hyperbolic tangent function, that is tan hx is equal to 1 plus 1 minus e to the power minus 2x by 1 plus e to the power minus 2x. So this is the formula where x is the local field. So it is this curve here. The function is differentiable, the function is monotonic while the derivative is not. The tan h function is mainly used for classification between two classes. So when we want to classify two classes based on two classes, the output, then we use the hyperbolic tangent function. Output is zero centered because its range is between -1 to 1. Hence optimization is easier in this method, and in practice it is always preferred over sigmoid function. So output basically varies from -1 to 1, and it is zero centered. Center is 0. So optimization is easier in this method, and in practice thus it is always preferred over sigmoid function. Next one is ReLU or rectified linear units, which is given by fx is equal to max of x and 0. The function and its derivative both are monotonic. It should only be used within hidden layer of neural network model. Hence, for output layers, use a softmax function for a classification problem in order to compute the probabilities for the classes, and for a regression problem it should simply use a linear function. So in the output layer we can use a softmax function when we use a classification problem, and when we have a regression problem we can use a linear function on the output layer when we are using ReLU on the hidden layer neural network. Next we have the leaky ReLU or leaky rectified linear unit, which is given as fx is equal to x if x less than 0, which is this one, and is equal to 0.01x otherwise, which is this one. Reduce a bit. So the problem with ReLU is that some gradients can be fragile during training and can die. So die means there will be no output for that input for during training time. It can cause a weight update which will make it never activate on any data point again. So activation does not happen when the weight update happens while using ReLU sometimes, and simply saying that ReLU could result in dead neurons. That means dead neurons might result when using ReLU. To fix this problem of dying neurons, another modification was introduced called leaky ReLU, which is this activation function. It introduces a small slope to keep the updates alive. So with this help of this slope, uh, its derivative will be better, and neurons won't die. So this is a summary of the activation functions mostly used. Here is a name and here's a plot. This is the equation and this is the derivative column. So this is the logistic one that we have discussed. The ReLUs are also shown here. Now we discuss network architectures and how different networks types that can be for a neural network. There are basically three different classes of network architectures: single layer feed forward neural networks, multi-layer feed forward neural networks, and recurrent neural networks. The architecture of a neural network is linked with the learning algorithm used to train. So the architecture of a neural network helps or defines the learning algorithm that is used to train the model. So the general structure will be this: there will be a set of input layers, a hidden layer, set of hidden layers, and the output layer. So what is single layer feed forward? It is a neural network having a single layer of inputs and a single layer of outputs with no hidden layer. Neural network having two inputs and one output units with no hidden layer is also known as a single layer perceptron. So what is a single layer neural network? It consists of an input layer and output layer with no hidden layers, and a neural network that is a single layer neural network having only two inputs nodes and one output node is a single layer perceptron that we will discuss in next module. So this is also termed as a perceptron, a single layer perceptron, that is a single entity of two input nodes and one output node. Next we discuss multi-layer feed-forward neural networks. So it consists of one input layer and a set of hidden layers, one or more hidden layers, and one output layer. So the hidden layer can be more than one. In this figure it is shown to be one for simplicity. So this is a multi-layer feed-forward neural network. So now finally we discuss recurrent network. A recurrent neural network is a class of artificial neural networks where connections between nodes form a directed graph along a temporal sequence. So in this, the output from the output layer is connected to the some bias or secondary bias that is again connected to the input layer. So basically there is a directed graph that follows a temporal sequence, and finally the output is provided in case some specific case when the error is zero maybe. So this is the recurrent neural network.